Picture this, you're a PlayStation 2 kid. 4 years in a row, without fail, there's a new Ratchet Clank game. A full game, a great game. You don't even have to check, it just arrives. That was the promise Insomniac made, and for 4 consecutive years, they kept it. Then something changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly. The PS3 era gives you 6 Ratchet games across 7 years. Sounds substantial on paper, until you realize that 2 of them are spin-offs that barely anyone remembers. One of them you can finish in an afternoon. One is a tower defense game that critics called the worst in the series. The PS4 gives you 1 game, a remake of the original, built to promote a movie that cost $20 million to make and barely scraped $14 million back at the box office. The PS5 gives you 1 game, genuinely brilliant, 4 years ago. And now, according to a leaked internal roadmap, the next Ratchet & Clank isn't coming until 2029 at the earliest, if it comes at all. Nobody killed this franchise. That's what makes this story so hard to tell. There's no villain, no hostile takeover, no mismanagement, just a slow, quiet extinguishing of something that once burned so bright it lit up an entire console generation. This is the slow death of Ratchet & Clank. Before we talk about what Ratchet & Clank became, we need to talk about the soil in which he budded from. It's the year 2000. Insomniac Games had just finished their 3rd and final Spyro game. 3 games, 3 years, millions of copies sold. By any measure, a success. But Spyro belonged to Universal, not Insomniac. They'd built something beloved and handed the keys to someone else. Sound familiar? So they walked away. Clean, no bitterness, no hostile exit. They just decided, whatever comes next, it belongs to us. They gathered 20 developers on a sun-drenched porch in Los Angeles and started asking the question, what do we build next? The answer didn't come easily. Their first concept never made it past the prototype stage. Their second, a mashup of Zelda and Tomb Raider they called Girl with a Stick, had 6 months of development work behind it before Ted Price looked at his team and saw nobody was excited, so he shut it down. That decision to kill something that wasn't working rather than push through and ship something hollow tells you everything about who Insomniac were at this moment. A studio with standards, a studio that would rather start over than settle. So they started over. Brian Hastings, Insomniac's chief creative officer, came to the table with a simple idea. An alien that travels from planet to planet collecting weapons and gadgets. He'd been thinking about Spaceman Spiff from Calvin and Hobbes, and also about Marvin the Martian. Something with energy, something inherently restless. The room came alive, because that one idea solved everything. If your hero travels planet to planet, you can build a new world every level. New characters, new enemies, new weapons. The creative possibilities were endless. They started sketching the character. Originally reptilian, then something softer, more expressive, more alive. They landed on a new species, feline in appearance, long-tailed, agile. Ted Price gave them a name, Lombax. Dave Gerton, the lead character designer, nailed the look within days. They gave him a robotic companion. Small, intelligent, the brains to balance the brawn. Within 2 weeks of committing to the concept, Ratchet & Clank existed. Now, the ownership question. Because this is where Ratchet & Clank's story diverges completely from Crash and Spyro. Insomniac didn't want to build another franchise they'd have to hand back, but they also couldn't fund a PS2 game alone. They needed a publisher. The difference this time was who that publisher was. Sony. Sony weren't Universal. They weren't looking to extract value from a franchise and then move on. They wanted a long-term partnership. They wanted to own the IP cleanly with no third-party licensing complications, and in exchange, they would protect it. For Insomniac, burned by the Spyro experience, that deal made sense. They gave up ownership, but they stayed in control. And the character they were building would never be taken somewhere they couldn't follow. Ratchet & Clank shipped November 2002 on PlayStation 2. Going Commando followed in November 2003. Up Your Arsenal in November 2004. Deadlocked in October 2005. 4 games, 4 consecutive years, all of them Insomniac. All of them excellent. Going Commando is still regarded by many fans as among the finest platformers ever made. Up Your Arsenal pushed further, bigger worlds, online multiplayer, the series' most iconic villain in Dr. Nefarious. Each game built on the last, like the studio was in a full sprint and enjoying every step. And what made these games genuinely special, what separated them from everything else on PlayStation 2, wasn't the weapons, though the weapons were extraordinary. It wasn't the worlds, though the worlds were stunning. It was the tone, sharp, funny, absurdist without being stupid, a difficult line to toe, a universe that played its own ridiculousness completely straight and somehow made that work every single time. By October 2005, Insomniac had done something that almost never happens in the industry. They'd voluntarily left behind a beloved franchise and built something bigger, a character with a devoted audience, critical acclaim, and a foundation sturdy enough to last generations. 4 years in, everything right. So why are we here talking about a slow death? Because somewhere between that porch in Los Angeles and where we are now, the sprint became a jog, then a walk, then something even quieter than that. By October 2005, Insomniac had shipped 4 games in 4 years. All of them excellent, all of them Insomniac, and the franchise was at its absolute peak. And then the pace changed. Insomniac had committed to building a PS3 launch title, a first-person shooter called Resistance: Fall of Man. Most of the studio pivoted to that. A small skeleton crew, about a dozen people, quietly began pre-production on the next Ratchet game. Starting from scratch, no engine, no assets, no PS3 hardware to even test on. 2 years passed. When Tools of Destruction finally arrived in October 2007, it was immediately clear that the time had been well spent. The PS3's hardware unlocked something new. Environments that looked almost hand-painted, cutscenes that felt like an animated film, a universe that had never looked more alive. Critics agreed, an 89 on Metacritic, but something else had shifted beneath the surface. Writer TJ Fixman had joined the team with a specific brief: take the mythology scattered across 4 PS2 games and build something deeper out of it. Give Ratchet a real backstory. Ask the questions the series had always avoided. Who are the Lombaxes? Where did they go? Who is Ratchet, really? Tools of Destruction started asking those questions and ended deliberately, provocatively, without answering them. Clank abducted by a mysterious alien race called the Zoni. The Lombax secret still locked away. Roll credits. It was a bold creative swing, an invitation to keep watching. The problem was what came next. Quest for Booty arrived in August 2008, a short bridge game, digital only in most markets, designed to tide fans over while a crack in time was finished. You could complete it in a couple of hours. It existed to fill a gap rather than push the story forward, and it felt exactly like that. Then a crack in time in October 2009, and this one delivered. Widely considered the finest Ratchet game of the PS3 era, it finally went deep on everything Tools of Destruction had promised. Ratchet meets another Lombax, General Alistair Azimuth, an elder who knew his father, who carries the weight of his species' downfall on his shoulders. The emotional stakes were higher than anything the series had attempted. The gameplay matched it. It ended with Clank standing at a crossroads. He could follow his people and fulfill his purpose, his destiny, or stay. He chose to stay, with Ratchet, with the life he'd built. It was a beautiful ending, and then Insomniac left the thread hanging and walked away from it. What followed over the next 4 years is where the slow death of Ratchet and Clank truly begins. Not with a bang, not with a scandal, with 2 decisions that, back to back, quietly drained the identity from one of PlayStation's greatest franchises. All for One launched October 2011, a 4-player co-op game. Ratchet, Clank, and 2 of their greatest villains forced to work together. Funny in places, chaotic in others, a 70 on Metacritic. Destructoid gave it 4 out of 10, calling it overpriced, overlong, and something that should have been a budget digital release. The platforming and shooting formula that had made the series great was diluted into something built for groups rather than crafted for one. And then came the real low point. Full Frontal Assault, November 2012. Released to mark the franchise's 10th anniversary, a tower defense game wearing a Ratchet and Clank costume, a 64 on Metacritic, the lowest score in series history. Electronic Gaming Monthly said it failed both as a tower defense game and as a way to hold fans over until a real sequel arrived. Eurogamer said it eroded the series' identity. PlayStation Official Magazine said it had no heart. No heart for the 10th anniversary of one of PlayStation's most beloved franchises. Into the Nexus arrived in 2013 and course-corrected. A return to classic Ratchet gameplay, warmer, more focused, a direct sequel to A Cracking Time, in tone if not in ambition. Critics responded positively, but it was one of the shortest games in the series, released at the end of the PS3's lifespan into a market already looking toward PS4. And it ended, again, with Ratchet and his friends heading off to find the Lombaxes, the same place A Cracking Time had left them 4 years earlier. The PS3 era gave Ratchet & Clank one genuine masterpiece, one filler bridge game, 2 experiments that failed, and a short epilogue. 7 years, 6 games, and the story that Insomniac had started telling in 2007, the one about where Ratchet came from, about who his people were, about what home might mean to a character who'd never had one, still sitting exactly where they'd left it. The PS4 was coming, a new generation, a clean slate. Surely now was the time to finish what they'd started. They had other plans. The PS4 arrives in November 2013, the most powerful PlayStation hardware ever built, and for Ratchet & Clank, surely this is the moment. 7 years of PS3, a story left unfinished, a fanbase still waiting. What they got instead was a bet, a big one, and it didn't pay off. The plan was ambitious in a way that made sense on paper. Sony and Insomniac would partner with a Canadian animation studio called Rainmaker Entertainment to produce a Ratchet & Clank animated film, not a quick cash-in, a proper cinematic release, built alongside a brand new PS4 game. The two would feed each other. The film drives audiences to the game keeps fans engaged with the film. Ratchet & Clank finally becomes a multimedia franchise. Rainmaker put up the majority of the $20 million production budget. They were the lead investor. They had the most to lose. The game came out first, April 2016, a remake of the original, rebuilt from the ground up using assets shared directly between Insomniac and the film production. It reviewed well, an 85 on Metacritic. Critics praised the gameplay, the humor, the visual polish. Fans bought it. But underneath the positive reception, something was off. This wasn't the continuation of the story fans had been waiting for since 2009. It was a remake dressed as a new beginning, and critics noted it played things safe, posting on nostalgia rather than pushing the franchise forward. The PS4 generation's one Ratchet game wasn't moving the story forward, it was moving it backwards. Then the film arrived, April 29, 2016. A cast that looked extraordinary on paper. Paul Giamatti, John Goodman, Sylvester Stallone, alongside the original game voice actors, James Arnold Taylor and David Kaye, reprising their roles. A 17% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, an opening weekend of $4.9 million, 7th place at the box office, behind The Jungle Book, which was in its 3rd week of release. The following weekend, ticket sales dropped 70%. Total worldwide gross? $14.4 million against a $20 million budget. Rainmaker announced an impairment charge, a formal financial write-down on their $10 million investment almost immediately. Their president issued a public statement saying they were disappointed with the results. It is one of the least encouraging press releases in animation history. TJ Fixman, the writer who had defined the voice of Ratchet & Clank across the entire PS3 era, who had built the future saga from the ground up, had written the original screenplay, but the script was so heavily rewritten by the director Kevin Munro and co-writer Jerry Swallow that Fixman publicly distanced himself from the final film before it even released, stating that the script had been rewritten so completely, so many times, that by the end, almost nothing of his original work remained. The man who understood Ratchet & Clank better than almost anyone alive had watched his vision get rewritten into something he didn't recognize. Kind of reminds me of George Lucas after the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilms, but I digress. Gramacry Pictures, the distributor, was quietly dissolved shortly after the film's release. It was the only animated film they ever made. And here's the thing that makes all of this genuinely painful for the franchise. The entire PS4 generation, a console that ran from 2013 to 2020, 7 years, produced exactly one Ratchet & Clank game. A remake, a movie tie-in, a game that looked backwards instead of forwards, and the story that Insomniac had started telling in 2007, Ratchet searching for his people, the question of who he is and where he came from, remained unsolved. It had been sitting there since Tools of Destruction, waiting, and it would keep waiting. 14 years in total before anyone would seriously pick it back up. Ratchet & Clank needed a resurrection, and against all odds, they got one. After the movie disaster, after a wasted console generation, an unresolved story, and a box office bomb, Ratchet & Clank needed to remind the world why they mattered. On June 11th, 2021, they did exactly that. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart launched as a PS5 exclusive, and from the moment people turned it on, it was clear this was something different. The PS5's SSD allowed the game to tear holes between dimensions in real time, entire worlds loading instantaneously, no transition screens, no clever tricks to disguise the weight. You fell through a rift and landed somewhere completely different before you'd even registered the change. It was the most dramatic demonstration of what the new hardware could actually do, and Insomniac were the ones doing it. The game introduced Rivet, a female Lombax from a parallel dimension, scrappy and battle-worn, with her own robot companion named Kit. She was designed to stand alongside Ratchet rather than behind him, and fans embraced her immediately. New characters, new energy, an invitation for a whole new audience to find their way in. Critically, it landed exactly where it needed to, an 89 on Metacritic. Rift Apart achieved the highest launch month dollar sales in franchise history, more than doubling the record set by the 2016 PS4 game. It was the best-selling game in the United States for the entire month of June 2021. Within 5 weeks, it had sold 1.1 million copies, roughly 1 in every 10 PS5 owners at the time. The resurrection was real. The franchise still had it. And then the game ended. Ratchet, Clank, Rivet, and Kit, the 4 of them together, stepping through a portal, heading off to finally find the Lombaxes. The same promise, the same open door. 12 years on, and the story was still exactly where Insomniac had left it. The question hanging in the air after Rift Apart wasn't whether Ratchet & Clank was still capable of greatness. It had just proven it was. The question was whether anyone was going to be allowed to finish what they started. The answer came from the last place anyone expected. In December 2023, a ransomware group called Reseda hacked Insomniac Games. They demanded $2 million. Sony refused to pay. We don't negotiate with terrorists. So, Reseda dumped everything. 1.67 terabytes of data, 1.3 million files onto the internet for anyone to read. Internal communications, employee passport scans, tax documents, personal records belonging to hundreds of Insomniac staff members, all of it exposed. And buried inside that stolen data, Insomniac's full development roadmap. Marvel's Wolverine, Venom, Spider-Man 3, X-Men, a licensing commitment of over $600 million to build Marvel games through to 2035. And there, towards the end of the roadmap, a new Ratchet & Clank game penciled in for 2029, a direct sequel to Rift Apart. 4 characters heading into the Lombax dimension together. The story Insomniac had started telling over a decade ago, finally, on paper at least, edging toward a conclusion. Except, the roadmap that leaked wasn't necessarily the current one. Game plans change, budgets shift, priorities get reorganized, and in the months following the hack, reports began to surface, unconfirmed but persistent, that the 2029 Ratchet game had been quietly removed from Insomniac's schedule entirely, that the Marvel commitments had consumed everything, that there simply wasn't room. Nobody at Sony or Insomniac had confirmed this. Nobody had denied it either. And that silence, from a studio that once shipped a Ratchet & Clank game every single year, is starting to feel like an answer. Let's go back to that porch in Los Angeles. The year 2000, 20 developers, 2 failed concepts behind them, no hardware to test on, no engine, no assets. Just an idea about an alien that travels planet to planet, and the belief that they could build something extraordinary out of it. That studio doesn't exist anymore. Not because Insomniac is gone. They're thriving. Over 500 employees across 2 studios, one of Sony's most commercially successful first-party developers, the team behind the most acclaimed superhero games ever made. But the studio that built Ratchet & Clank from nothing, small, independent, creatively fearless, making a game every year because they loved making games, that studio has been replaced by something almost unrecognizable. And that transformation is the final chapter of this story. When Sony acquired Insomniac in 2019 for $229 million, it wasn't just a business transaction, it was a statement of intent. Sony wasn't buying a platformer studio, they were buying the team that had just delivered Marvel's Spider-Man, a game that sold tens of millions of copies and redefined what a superhero game could be. They were buying capability, scale, commercial reliability, and with that acquisition came a roadmap that had very little room for a cartoon Lombax. The leaked documents from the Reseda hack told the story in plain numbers. $621 million committed to developing and marketing Marvel games through to 2035, a publishing pipeline that would occupy Insomniac's best teams for the better part of a decade. A Ratchet game penciled in for 2029, if it still exists at all. Then, Sony announced sweeping layoffs across PlayStation Studios, 900 jobs cut across the company. Insomniac were hit. Staff who had worked on Spider-Man, on Rift Apart, on the franchise that defined PlayStation's identity for an entire console generation, gone. Insomniac themselves called it a solemn and unprecedented moment for the studio. The economics are simple and brutal. A Ratchet & Clank game sells in the low millions. A Spider-Man game sells tens of millions. When you're a studio with a $600 million Marvel commitment, a workforce you've just had to cut, and a Sony parent company that needs blockbuster returns, you don't prioritize the Lombax. Not because you don't love him, because you can't afford to. And here's the thing that makes the slow death of Ratchet & Clank different from the deaths of Crash and Spyro. Crash was taken, ripped away from the people who built him, handed to strangers, run into the ground by people who didn't understand what he was. Spyro was hollowed out, dissolved into a toy franchise by a corporation chasing $3 billion. Ratchet's fate is quieter, more complicated, almost sadder. Nobody took him, nobody mismanaged him, the studio that built him loves him, the company that owns him has protected the IP perfectly. He's sitting in Sony's library right now, fully intact, critically acclaimed, with a fan base that never left, and a story that has been waiting nearly 2 decades for a conclusion, and he still might never get one. Not because anyone decided Ratchet & Clank was over, but because the world around him kept getting bigger. The games got more expensive, the stakes got higher. The studio that once shipped a Ratchet game every single year became one of the most valuable developers on the planet, and somewhere in that ascent, the little Lombax mechanic got left behind. The flame isn't out. Not yet. But look at the timeline. Look at the gaps. Look at the roadmap. Look at the silence coming from a studio that once made a Ratchet & Clank game every single year. The silence says something. It just doesn't say it out loud. We started this video with a heartbeat. 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. Strong and steady. A game every year. A studio that couldn't stop building. A franchise that couldn't stop growing. A character that felt like he was going to be around forever. And we end it here in the quiet. That's what makes Ratchet & Clank's story so hard to sit with. There's no villain. No betrayal. No single moment where you can point and say, that's where it went wrong. Insomniac are brilliant, Sony are protective. The last game was excellent and the fanbase never left. And yet here we are, nearly 2 decades since the story began, the same cliffhanger sitting unresolved, a roadmap that may or may not still have room for him, a studio with bigger things to build. Not abandoned out of spite, nor killed out of greed, just quietly deprioritized by an industry that moves fast and a business that has to make hard choices. 15 games, nearly 25 years, a story that's been pointing towards the same destination since 2007 and still hasn't arrived. Whether it ever does, that's the question nobody at Sony seems ready to answer. But now it's time for the Dandana Squidz discussion, where you get to share your thoughts and opinions on this topic. Do you still believe? Do you think Insomniac will finish what they started? That Ratchet will finally find his people? That the story gets the ending it's been building towards for nearly 20 years? Or do you think that moment has passed and Rift Apart was quietly the last one? Drop your answers in the comments because I want to know where you stand. If you've made it to the end of this video, you already know these aren't quick turnarounds. Every script, every fact check, every edit is a labor of love. I put everything I have into telling these stories the right way, because that's what these stories deserve. That's what you deserve. And if you want to help me keep doing that, you can join the Squidz Squad through the membership link below. Different tiers, different perks, behind the scenes access, early releases, and the ability to connect with me directly and have a real say in what stories we tell next. No pressure, but if you've ever watched one of these videos and thought, I want more of this, that's exactly what the membership's for. Link is below. As always, I'm Dandana Squidz, and this is the home of retro, classic, and nostalgia gaming. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Much love, squad, and I'll see you in the next one.